Now, I get that Rumors is obviously a seminal album, but like, how is it that the third line of that album is "Let Me Do My Stuff"? They couldn't write a better line than that. I'm still confused every time I listen.
A lot of the WNBA draft conversation is about the stars, and rightfully so. But there's a lot of value in getting role players outside of the top 10 in the WNBA draft. Today we're evaluating UCLA's Charisma Osborne and Florida's Leilani Correa on this Saturday edition of Locked On Women's Basketball.
Ogunbowale for the win. Good!
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Welcome. You are Locked On Women's Basketball. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. My name is Hunter Cruse. I'm your Saturday host covering the WNBA Draft and prospect scouting. I am joined by my co-hosts Adler and Lincoln Shafer. Lincoln is our biomechanics guru and contributes to our WNBA Draft coverage at the Next. I'm also joined by Adler off a scouting trip from Canada. And how was that trip?
So it turns out that the only good Canadian players are Leah Edwards and Cheyenne Day Wilson. Tough beat.
Before we get into the episode, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So just a disclaimer for our audio listeners, Locked On is in the middle of like a publishing change right now, so this episode won't be available on audio platforms until Monday. But besides that, let's get into talking about first Charisma Osborne out of UCLA. What have you seen from Osborne this season? How does that compare to what you've seen last season? And what is your where would you start with her evaluation?
I would start with the insanity run she was on to begin the season from 3. It was pretty good. It was nice to see her hitting a bunch of shots. And, I think she was hitting something like 40% over her first, 8 games, maybe.
It might have been 50%. I think.
Yeah, it was something insane.
Yeah.
And then she immediately returned to the Charisma Osborne we all know and love, which is, a player who can do a whole lot of stuff and a player whose present jump shot at time of press leaves us with a bit of a philosophical question about how useful her skill set is given that limitation, I think. Lincoln probably, more than anyone, was waiting for that plane to crash.
A little bit. She's a really fun basketball player who I enjoy watching. Do I wish that she was a 36% shooter instead of a 32% shooter? Absolutely. Do I wish that she was 6'1" instead of 5'8.5"? Also, absolutely. But she's a solid defensive guard who plays hard. She's up to her playmaking volume this year, sharing playmaking duties with Kiki Rice at UCLA. It turns out when you put a 6'7" big in the middle who's a great finisher, your guards get easier looks and easier playmaking opportunities. But she's just like a solid player. She's always to me read as really smooth and never out of control. Really, she plays at her own pace, and she's very good when she can play at her own pace and kind of lead the dance. Um, I have some questions about like her position and role, and the efficiency in that role. She's not quite good enough shooter to be, primarily like high leverage off ball role, but she's not necessarily good enough on the ball to demand primary, maybe even secondary usage. But it's the kind of be a star in your role, play good defense, and be a solid decision maker. And that's kind of what you're asking her to do as a basketball player.
Yeah, she's a player who, not necessarily fills in a playmaking role, and I think the sense that we've gotten when we've talked about Shirley Slitter-Walker back before New Year's or around New Year's, when we've talked about Sarah Andrews in the past and trying to project an archetype for her. She does However, Phil, I think the Stephen Trinkwald test of do you want the ball in this player's hands, which is she a driver of efficient offense? And, she is. She's a player who does a whole hell of a lot of stuff when she's on the ball. She really has a great feel for keeping her dribble alive, for getting the ball into pockets of the half court where, it can go, where it should go, and be able to, create the advantages for an offense that go from there. I think people are going to label her I shouldn't say I think. People are going to label her as a point guard. I think we can all agree that she's just absolutely not someone you want. And I don't want to say absolutely in in overwhelming this is a bad idea sense, but she's just someone who is very clearly, I think for us, a plus offensive and not engine, a plus offensive mover at the 2. And I think that's sort of where it gets a little unfortunate. You don't have a little more height coming from her skill set, of a little more shooting. And that's the thing. Like when you mentioned, do I wish she was blank? Do I wish she was blank? At her current skill set, if she was, a capital G good 3-point shooter, that's a great player we're talking about. At her current skill set, if she was 5'11", 6 foot, that's a really good player we're talking about. She's not a bad player at all in this sense, but it does become a question of, at this point with her height and her shooting, I think it means that we have a lot of, and I've talked about this before with different players, we have a lot of secondary skills, but what are those worth if you don't have sort of the primary skills to force defenses to really respect you in the first place?
Do you know what she's shooting on pull-up threes this season?
No, but I'm sure you do.
7.4%. She's made
Do you
2
know?
of them.
Do you know what she's shooting on threes in conference play this season?
20-something, 22% maybe, 25?
24.5%.
Yeah, the thing with her shooting is, and it's always been a worry for me, is she makes the wide open threes, but whenever she has a contest at all, and it has something to do with her mechanics, it's just kind of like a really weird shot. She's shooting 40. It's like a weird her shoulder mobility, it's really weird.
Part of that could come back to
it's
the
very
history
heavily
of
based
shoulder
on generating
injuries.
power. Oh, sorry, yeah, it's very heavily based on generating power from a shoulder rotation. And as Lincoln mentioned, she's had some injuries to the shoulders before. I mean, that's why her 3-point percentage was bad last season. She's basically an extraordinarily consistent 34% 3-point shooter. And that's a fine player. Again, I don't know necessarily if that plays up the post usage that she's able to do really well, especially at her height. I don't know if that plays up the pick and roll. I don't know. The pick and roll is a separate issue we can talk about in a minute. But I don't know if that plays up, the gnashing. I don't know if that plays up the off-ball movement in a way that, just to contrast with her teammate, with how good Kiki Rice is at getting to the rim and the decel out of the pick and roll, that is a real primary skill that I think plays up a lack of secondary skills for Kiki Rice that Osborne is sort of the inverse with. And it makes Kiki Rice a much more threatening, I think, isolation microwave scorer.
Yeah, with Osborne, with the jump shot you were saying, there's a little bit of oddness in the mechanics. Something that I noticed watching her a lot last year is that when she's shooting, she kind of has like a 30% full body rotational turn, which is interesting, and it means that she lands facing towards the left corner of the hoop or the left corner of the court when she's shooting straight on, and that can lead to an instability in her pull-up jump shots that I think is going to make her never a good to great pull-up jump shooter from outside of 15 feet. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and I think in terms of, talking about someone we're projecting to be a 2-guard, we don't need them to be able to really hit enough pull-up threes to make that a super weapon. We're talking about someone who just needs to be able to hit enough threes to be respected from that sense. And the question then becomes, I think, there are a lot of players where we say, hey, if they hit just enough threes off the catch or just enough threes when they're open, then that is enough to play up the rest of what they do because we like it so much. I think this is sort of the Nika Mule sense. If she's hitting 38% of 38, 37%, whatever, of her open catch and shoots, which she has for most of her career, can we do that on enough volume that we get the defense that we want out of her? I think with Osborne, she's a very good defender. She, like I said, is a really good mover of offense, and I think, she has the rest of the versatility. But given I think we'll talk about this in the next segment, but given that I don't necessarily know how much she actually threatens defenses out of a pick and roll, I don't know if you're necessarily getting as much out of just having her be good enough on threes.
After the break, we'll talk about Florida fifth-year senior guard Leilani Correa. But first, here's a word from our sponsor. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you feel really good? That's what I get with Stitch Fix. With Stitch Fix, you can get a stylist who understands your style, size, and budget. They do all the shopping for you. It's the easiest way to update your wardrobe this season. Easily upgrade your wardrobe this season with a professional stylist that helps you find the new on-trend favorites that will work for you. If you don't love something, you can return it, no questions asked, for free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. I'm your host, Hunter Cruse, and before we get back into our conversation on Leilani Correa, I want to inform you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So this is what I would call a Hunter Cruse All-Star, this section right here. Leilani Correa out of Florida, she just does a lot of things that I really like. 6-foot wing, can defend a little bit off the ball. She can shoot, or she shot this season. So that's kind of where I want to start with just the conversation around shooting. And with Leilani Correa, she has been shooting the ball over the last couple of months. She's shooting 55.6% on unguarded catch and shoot threes and 38% on guarded catch and shoot threes. She is not a good pull-up shooter whatsoever, but a lot of off-ball value there. What do you guys like with her? What are you concerned about? I'll start with you, Lincoln, because I know you're a little bit on the questionable side with Correa.
Yeah, she's quick. She's got a solid first step. She's big at an off-ball guard position. She has been shooting the absolute leather off the ball for the last 15 to 20 games. I just worry that the 120 games of 40% from the field and 33% from three are going to be a better indicator of her true shooting talent than the 15 games of 49% from the field, 49% from three.
Well, that's why we look these things up, right? She,
Right,
for
yeah.
basically her entire college career, has been about a 40% open three-point shooter.
Yeah, that's true, and that's a very good thing. I don't think that she's necessarily a standout performer in any of the skills that you want, but she's not bad at any of the skills that you want either. She's like she can make straightforward playmaking reads. She can hit open shots. She can drive with quickness. I have questions about the finishing process, but
Just questions?
there's full blown concerns even. But she's like a player who she's not going to get picked on defensively, and she's not going to take things off the table for you offensively, which there's a role for that. There's some value in that. Well, I question if the value is that of a WNBA player if she's not hitting 36, 37% of her 3-point attempts instead of 32, 33.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You also, I think, have to consider the context of playing with St. John's and playing with Florida. And I was going to say Florida before this year, but frankly, even Florida this year, where, she is, if not the best, like the 1B scoring option, and defenses give her a level of attention and that, you're not necessarily going to see the WNBA, which is kind of the inverse of, I think, most players that we usually talk about. If you think about Leilani Correa's game against South Carolina from this year, that is legitimately a level of defensive attention and talent she would probably never see in the W. South Carolina has a lot of WNBA caliber defenders, you are not actually going to have Raven Hall and Bree Hall, or Raven Johnson and Bree Hall, like those two literal players guarding her in the WNBA, because they'll be concerned with actually like better players. And I think that's the thing with Leilani Correa is we're not talking about a role 4 here. We're not talking about a Charisma Osborne here either. We're talking about someone who, she sinks a heck of a lot of threes. She's been doing that for her whole career. She's just been tasked with taking an inefficient selection of them. I think given the supporting cast, she's not going to continue to hit literally half the threes like she has in conference play. But I think, when you look at someone who is able to hit a lot of threes and able to hit them well, even off of a little bit of movement, when you look at someone who moves well on offense to relieve pressure for teammates or open their own shot, when you look at someone who gets to the rim a ton and is fouled there a ton, she can't finish at all. She's an absolutely terrible finisher, but she, I think, gets fouled a ton enough to kind of offset some of that, and she basically never turns over the ball. I think that's enough altogether to say, this is a clearly positive impact offensive player. I think a lot of it from there comes down to the defense, which is an interesting collection of skills and talents, I would say. Like, it's not straightforwardly bad or good. It's just sort of somewhere in the middle.
She has the athletic tools, long wingspan. I think that's kind of what you bet on. The wing position.
Sort of. I don't love what she does with her hips. I think defensively her hips are kind of stiff. I think she has a lot of issues on the drive being super jumpy. Like she's really vulnerable to hezzies in space. So do you want her defending your number 1 or number 2 scoring option at the wing? Probably not. And I think that limits kind of her upside there. But she is quite good off the ball. She's a legitimately decent help defender. So I think from there, given the size, like you said, with the wingspan, I think it's okay. It's enough to not get played off the court. I don't know if it's enough in the W, given what we've seen with how they value wings. I don't know if it's enough to necessarily get her a real shot.
Yeah, so after the break, we'll talk about where both Osborne and Correa rank on our board, team fits, and more. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week. Whether you're preparing for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you with players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Keep an eye out for Hornets guard Trey Mann. Mann is what I would call a hooper, all caps. He is a hooper, and with LaMelo Ball's status up in the air, Mann needs to be grabbed in fantasy leagues. Josh Lloyd of Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED lights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever it needs. eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Opening up, I want to talk about where they both rank on our board. For you first, Em, where are you at on Osborne and then Correa?
I think I talked myself into Osborne a little more than I had been on her coming into this episode. Not by a huge amount, but at least definitely a few spots in the draft. I think for me, these are both players that fall into pretty much the same tier of, these are hard threes in terms of when we talk about draft skills. I think the difference sort of between a normal 3 and a hard 3 is basically just, am I talking about the upside of a player who is a fine rotation player, or an upside of a player who I think could start on a bad team? And I think Osborne gets there for me. I think Leilani Correa is it's how much you believe in the driving defense. The on-ball defense. Again, I don't love it. So she's basically like a half tier lower than Correa for me. I put them both in sort of the early to mid second round. For me, Correa sits in terms of or not Correa, sorry. Comparing positions, looking at guards, I have Osborne basically behind Amor and Sarah Andrews, and ahead of Hannah Jump and Nika Mule. And looking at wings, I have Correa a few spots below Osborne. I have Correa after, what do we define as a wing? I have her after Poach and Shear, and ahead of, I don't actually know if there's any other wings here. Are there any other draftable wings that we'd have that low?
It's an interesting question to think about moving forward.
And that's kind of why
the same camp. Yeah,
it's kind of why Correa, I think, is a top 15 prospect, kind of top 20 prospect for me. Is just because there's not wings in the depth of this draft.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. And yeah, I have her. Yeah, I mean, I have them both. I have Osborne 14 and Leilani Correa 17.
Yeah, I like to think of them in kind of the same tier, roughly in that 14 to 19 range in the mid second round. Definitely is going to be where they fall for me right now. They're both interesting players who can do interesting things on the court, and it's just a matter of putting all of those interesting things together and making them work as a cohesive basketball player instead of just a collection of interesting things.
Yeah, I've got 30s on both of them. I have Correa atop my 30 tier, very high on her game, potentially being just an end of bench type player as a rookie. And a big thing we're going to talk about a lot as the rest of this draft cycle goes is the value of team context with these like fringy players, to where are you guys at on like specific teams that would just really benefit these players? Like for any teams in specific that you like for Osborne?
I say this completely unironically. Dallas. I think with Osborne, it's Lincoln definitely does not agree.
I think that's an interesting thought. It's one of the ones that I had on my short list, but it's not my top fit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily my like number one, but for Osborne, I think I'm not sure that there's much upside here unless we're like completely revamping her strength trading and her 3-point form. So from there, I think it's just give her somewhere that she can get some runway. Give her somewhere that she doesn't have to be like the lead offensive initiator, but that she can have other people to help create open shots for and really take advantage of the openings they create. Dallas doesn't really need a typical point guard. If you want to start Charisma Osborne there, I think that's a pretty good fit. I don't know if she's actually going to be a WNBA starting caliber player, but you know what I mean in that sense. I mean, they started Crystal Dangerfield, for God's sake. I don't know if there's anything else necessarily comes to mind. Washington would be interesting in terms of, that kind of tanking team. Leilani Correa could honestly just go most places. I mean, that's the archetype we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Is someone who's just kind of plug and play.
Yeah.
In specific, though, I need Connecticut. I just think that's fun.
That would actually be a very good fit.
Like the Beck Allen type of she's not quite Beck Allen, but
she's not quite Beck Allen. That's an understatement.
She's not quite Beck Allen, but like they like.
She's not going to make an all defense team.
They like those type of players, though. That's like the kind of player they like.
They like wings who move well and hit threes. Yes.
Yeah.
My dream Charisma Osborne fit would be backing up Kelsey Mitchell in Indiana. You put her in a position where she doesn't have to take a lead playmaking role because you have 40 minutes of Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell. She can hit spot ups and play defense, and that's what I think I want her to do at the next level. And I think that would be a really interesting fit for that.
You have just described Christy Wallace.
Yep, I thought of that. It's never bad to have more of that when you have Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark on your team, though. Also thought of New York Liberty for Charisma Osborne could be an interesting fit. In a place where she doesn't have to be a primary playmaker and can just hit shots and play defense.
Yeah, they need bench guards who can dribble and play defense.
Absolutely.
They need bench guards. They just need guards. They don't have a point. Who are their backup guards right now?
That's actually a fascinating question.
Like, do they have? I think they might have a couple like training camp
Kennedy
players.
Burke. Morgan Green signed another training camp contract.
Yeah.
And then Correa, I think Correa could be interesting in LA, they just need wings.
Oh, Ivana Dojkic they
Um,
have.
that's true. Yep.
That's
Yeah,
I think with
actually
Correa,
it.
Yeah, that's good.
you said that you'd like to see Correa in Connecticut. There's a Connecticut connection. Just give Kurt Miller a wing, please.
He has one. Her name's
They
Zaya
have
Cook.
one. They have Ray Burrell too.
Zaya Cook, Ray Burrell, and Azare Stevens. Those are their wings.
Yeah,
So
they lost the Samuelsons. They need somebody who can shoot and make some plays. You know, it's an interesting fit. I like to think about that fit. That'd be fun to me.
Speaking of which, we didn't. I alluded to this in the first segment, but we didn't end up getting to it. We talked about Osborne and playing up these secondary skills.
Mhm.
If she's an off-ball shooter, a fine off-ball shooter. When we're talking about on-ball, playmaking is itself a secondary skill. You need ways to make a defense care about you doing other stuff. Do you trust Osborne to actually threaten to score out of the pick and roll?
No.
It's
I
a
don't
lot
think
of
she has.
mid-range pull-ups.
It's a lot of them, and she's not good at them.
I think I think you kind of just live with that, and she's not like a great finisher either. She's not like
I think
crazy
she's a perfectly
athletic.
fine finisher, but she just doesn't get to the rim very often. And again, I don't think any of us trust the pull-up mid-range shot, right?
Not
No.
necessarily.
So that's where you sort of, I think, differentiate her from like, hey, what if Crystal Dangerfield could play defense? I go just on the Dallas idea in my mind, like that becomes a very different question. I think for again, the value of secondary skills is in what they are secondary to, and I don't. It's tough.
Yeah, I know Dallas is gonna like that defense for sure.
Dallas
She
likes
plays
defense.
she plays hard.
Yeah.
So thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Join the team back next week for continued coverage of women's college basketball. Make your second listen Locked On Sports today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.